PTSD. It's in the name.
Welcome into the Helping Healing Humor podcast with Ben and Travis. Today, we're going to be talking a little post-traumatic stress disorder. It is June, which is PTSD month, and so we'll have that discussion with All-Pro Counselor Ben Hayes right after these messages. This episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast is brought to you by the 2023 Heritage event on Saturday, August 26th, featuring an incredible night of music from the frontmen of country, the Secret Sisters, and Cadence Baker. General admission tickets and table sponsorships are available for purchase. For more information, visit www.hcu.edu. The mission of Heritage Christian University is simple. They aim to advance the churches of Christ by equipping servants through undergraduate and graduate programs. HCU produces effective communicators of the gospel, focusing on evangelism and a commitment to Scripture. Heritage Christian University offers the following degrees: Associate of Arts in Biblical Studies, Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Studies, Master of Arts, Master of Ministry, and Master of Divinity. HCU is accredited by the Association for Biblical Higher Education and is an associate member of the Association of Theological Schools. Since 1968, Heritage Christian University has offered affordable degrees in biblical studies, allowing graduates to thrive in their ministries without the burden of loan debt. For the fall 2023 semester, HCU is offering full tuition scholarships for graduate-level students. For more information about Heritage Christian University or the annual Heritage event, visit www.hcu.edu. I'm Travis Creasy. That's All-Pro Counselor Ben Hayes. How you doing, man?
Man, I am great. It has been a busy summer so far, and it's just going to be busy for a while, it looks like.
We'll hit the ground running.
Camp before too long.
Coming down. Probably when this is released, we'll be at camp.
You've
rocking and rolling.
Just done a meeting. I'm doing a meeting in July.
Yeah.
So all kinds of stuff going on
Your
this summer.
Kiddos will have returned, along with, more importantly, your wife.
Yes.
I'm sure they'll all agree with that.
Looking forward to her and Destin. And, of course, Will has not been on several episodes with us because he is down in Africa, and we could start singing all kinds of songs, but we're just going to leave that
Maybe
alone.
by this point, by the time this airs, you're probably ready for them all to go back to Africa.
It could be.
Let's not get you in trouble.
No, I won't get in trouble. That was they've had a good time. Great stuff going on there. Dorian Flynn does good work down in Zimbabwe, and so they have been enjoying that, and hopefully something we can be a part of for a while.
So, as mentioned in the intro, we're going to talk a little bit about post-traumatic stress disorder. You guys at 3 Chord Counseling, that's kind of still a new venture for you and Karen Rand and Pam Lenz, no strangers to the show. Great supporters, good friends. Y'all been posting some good stuff on your Facebook page. Challenge everybody to go like that, follow that.
Check it out.
We've been sharing it, so just go to our page, click on that, some of those pictures, and you can follow them there about PTSD. And so we're going to spend some time talking about that. So the first question would be, what is PTSD?
Well, I mean, the name of it, a lot of times we just hear PTSD and people kind of throw that around with a lot of different things. And of course, like it is with a lot of disorders, there are very specific criteria for it. Sometimes we say, oh, I've got PTSD, or I've got OCD, or I've got these things. And we kind of throw it around almost, and not everybody, but some people almost in a joking manner. And the people who have those actual diagnoses, it's not funny, it's not, they are significant events, and so there is a criteria. We won't go through all that. That's more for a professional to do with you individually and to go over, but
we're not diagnosing anybody here.
Right. So, don't listen in and think, oh, this is exactly what I have, and so start, self-diagnosing or whatever. Make sure that you go to a professional and have that very specifically done with you. But PTSD itself is what those letters stand for: post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's an anxiety-related disorder that has to do with your fight or flight mechanism being triggered again after something. So, when we start thinking about what is it, we almost have to think about what causes it. So what are the reasons for it? So there's there's the initial event that happens. There's something that has happened to you, something traumatic that has happened, and generally speaking, that has to do with exposure to an actual or perceived or threatened death or significant event like that. And so someone, some event has happened, and as a result of it, people then relive it in these post-traumatic episodes. I guess that would be the best way of saying that. So that's kind of a real quick synopsis of what it is.
Nice. We like quick around here. Of course, this is one of those things we said we're not diagnosing people. It's probably not a quick fix for those who are struggling with it, but we did want to make some awareness here and touch on it, of course. And so kind of the next question is, what causes it? I know a lot of times it's associated with military persons who've seen a lot of action or have seen a lot of folks struggle in that situation, things that maybe the rest of us have not been privy to or experienced.
Yeah, so a lot of times we do think about it as just being a military experience, or some people may think of it that way, and it's certainly not. It can be, because obviously our folks who are in the military, we're very thankful here at Ben and Travis for the service of those individuals, but a lot of people in the military have experienced things where they have been in situations where they thought that they were going to die. They may have seen other people who have been killed in action. And then you also have, but it's not limited to military. There are a lot of people. Of course, we have a lot of things like school shootings that have been occurring. We have, people who are in car accidents, house fires, a lot of things where people have, either thought they were going to die, or they've experienced exposure to death in those events. And so PTSD is kind of like it, there's some event that has led to it, but then there are these symptoms that occur afterwards. And so you have the presence of certain things within their life after they have gotten home. And so just to kind of give a quick idea of, and we may have talked about this before, but I mentioned earlier fight or flight mechanisms. So within your brain, a lot of people believe that the PTSD is kind of a loop in what we call the amygdala. So the amygdala is a part of the brain that is responsible for fight or flight. It's responsible for kind of the seat of your fears and all of that, those sorts of things. So when the amygdala is triggered, it sends all of those different signals to the brain, which sends all these different signals to the body, and so your body responds. So we've talked a little bit about that with just anxiety in general. Sometimes that happens. So when we have a perceived threat, those things kick in. Well, with PTSD, it's they're reliving that moment. All of those things are kind of flooding back, and so they may have nightmares. They may have very intrusive, distressing memories of the traumatic event. Their body kicks in. I've known of people who, when they get surrounded in traffic, they believe they go back to a place in Afghanistan where they were surrounded by enemy trucks or whatever going down the road, and that's the way they would kind of box them in for certain maneuvers. And so, driving on the interstate, they had a traumatic event or post-traumatic episode. Being in a store where there were people who looked similar to those that they may have been fighting, and that triggered them to reach into their pocket and grab their knife and be automatically thinking that they were in those situations even though they weren't. And so there's things like that. That's more than military, but you have people who will experience car accidents. So people who have trouble getting back in a car, or who going down the road, something similar happens, and all of a sudden they're overwhelmed with these thoughts and these feelings. And so those are the kind of things that you experience. And it's not just, oh man, that made me think of this. It is It is a trauma, reliving the trauma that's happening.
So you said trauma. What is trauma? What do you qualify as a traumatic event? I guess it's more of their experience, right? We don't want to box
Sure.
anybody in.
Yeah.
We all react. This supercomputer that God has given us between our ears, sometimes it doesn't feel like a supercomputer, but it still outdoes most of everything else that we've created. And so it's up to each individual that responds to those. So.
Yeah, so people could have exposure to those sorts of events and not have post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's altogether possible that somebody could have, been involved in. I mean, you have police officers and firefighters and people who daily.
And I would say
sometimes
it can build, right? You
you
can go 20 years and not have a response, see all this trauma, and then it builds up, you haven't dealt with it, and then something that is maybe run-of-the-mill, something you see every day, all of a sudden it's like, it triggers that.
Yeah. So you've got all kinds of different things. That's why I think it's really important that, you can listen to this and go, oh, wow, I'm having some of those things. And it may not be that, but it could be just that build up through the years, and that's why it's important to maybe see somebody who can, sit and diagnose that specifically for what you need. But yeah, you have things that people, I've known of firefighters or police officers who just never dealt with any of the things that they saw. And so later on, they really, the whole book, we've talked about before, The Body Keeps the Score. And over all that time, that may or may not be post-traumatic stress, but it's very similar to it in that they've kind of housed those feelings. And so it could be any number of those things. But when you say, what is trauma? We all experience trauma on some level. We've all experienced death. We've all experienced situations. Maybe it's a car accident or whatever. Some of those traumas are smaller traumas. Divorce is a trauma. It's not particularly a perceived threat that, I'm going to die. Or the friend of mine is going to die, or I may not have flashbacks of those specific moments. So those things are kind of, sometimes we qualify them as big T, little t traumas. I don't know how accurate or great that is, but there are things that traumatize us on a smaller level that may not create these bigger responses. And so
or over time adding up.
Right, or those traumas add up. We've talked about ACEs before, adverse childhood experiences. Those sorts of things sort of build on each other and create a lot of problems for people down the road. Sometimes those, ACEs, obviously one of those is, experience the death of someone, or had a situation like that. Those are absolutely adverse childhood experiences. But so there's just a lot of different veins to this. It's hard to answer it all in one little episode.
That'll make the next question difficult too.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
What are some treatments for PTSD? I know there's some even for what we might call little T. Breathing exercises. I did that the other night. My daughter comes in and she's had a nightmare, and so we kind of worked through some
traumatic
breathing process there, and it seemed to work. It certainly helped me from being upset with her, waking me up at 2 o'clock in the morning. But anyways,
yeah. Well, so there's a lot of different things. Certainly I'm not qualified as a therapist to prescribe medication, but there are people who have found medication to be helpful. Just like with any anxiety, there are some medications out there that can help with it. So that would be a question for a doctor or for a psychiatrist to help you with. However, there's a lot of things that people have developed over time, different therapies we've talked about, and encouraged if you are having some of these symptoms, a good place to start is with a counselor, wherever that may be. And I've got several friends in the Huntsville area. Lonnie Jones does some rapid resolution therapy. He also does EMDR. So EMDR is a great, I think we've had Karen maybe on talking about EMDR before. Karen in our area is qualified to do EMDR. And those have been found to be very helpful. They're it's a processing of, just like when you sleep, your eyes move and you're processing whatever has happened during that day, or through, you may have dreams about things that happened years ago. It's your brain still trying to process, and so they kind of help you process in the therapy session the trauma that you've experienced. And so as they are helping you or doing that, that kind of helps work out some of those traumatic events. Rapid resolution therapy does some of the same thing, tries to help you realize that sometimes with trauma, we pause it in the worst possible moment. So, hey, this happened and all I can see is this, this death or this bomb going off or this whatever the case may be. Well, what happened after that? There's a lot of things that have happened since then. And, even I was looking at something on some of the VA health and VA information on it. And one of the things that it did say was, when we go through difficult times, we grow. And so there is, and there can be growth from experienced difficult times. We've talked about that many times on here of, most stories aren't very inspiring if we haven't went through anything. But when we've gone through something, on the other side of it, we've experienced strength. So helping people identify that, yes, you experienced this moment, but look, there's a lot of moments since then, and you've grown through those moments. And sometimes helping them unpause the story in the middle of this traumatic event and move forward. So there's a lot of different things: medication, counseling, EMDR, which is a type of counseling, rapid resolution therapy. And there's a lot of different things that people have used with it. But I would say a lot of times, if counseling doesn't help in and of itself, sometimes it takes both. I'm a pretty firm believer, I'm a counselor, but that don't just throw medicine at things. I think there's also a need to process through some of the stuff because it stays with you. Medicine is just sort of to help get through those moments. So
I think for me, this has been an aspect in the past about getting help. Getting help is not a lack of toughness. It's not a lack of strength.
No.
In fact,
No.
it's to me, it's kind of a characteristic of it, understanding that we need help from time to time, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's called human beings, just like your team, if it's a military situation, just like your family, if it's in one of those situations. It's not a weak thing to seek help.
Biological response.
Yes.
It's a physiological response to something that's happening. It's the way our brains are designed and set up. So they're set up to, when we are threatened, I'm going to sweat. My heart's going to race. My lungs are going to fill up faster. My stomach's going to want to empty. All of those things are physiologically there to protect us in fight or flight moments. So in that moment where you are experiencing those things, to sweat and your heart race and you to feel sick at your stomach and all those things are normal so that you can run or fight. Okay, so your body's doing everything it's supposed to do, but it's just reliving because it was such a traumatic event. So it is not a flaw. It is not that something's wrong with you or more a failing or that you're not praying enough. We've gone through that before. So, these are just things that end up being there as a result of. And so don't, first of all, don't feel bad about it, and understand that there's probably a whole lot more people who deal with it than oftentimes talked about. So please don't feel like it's a moral failing, something negative. It's something that I know it's a part of you you don't maybe like to have to relive. So finding help, there's nothing wrong with.
Absolutely. Ben, we mentioned that we will be at camp when this releases. And so maybe there are some traumatic events at camp. I've seen people get smashed in the face with softballs, and not to make light of the, as we mentioned earlier,
balloons in people's
eyes.
eyes.
Some pretty hardcore stuff going on there. But what's one thing, and I'll start, and it kind of goes back to what we said right before. It's kind of that moment where kids seem to be a lot more willing to open up and admit they need help, especially at camp, because they see other people doing it. And I think sometimes, and certainly there needs to be remorse when we have hurt our relationship with God or sinned, but there's also an encouragement there, that there's an openness kind of that Jesus speaks to about kids. there's a trust there that I think sometimes as we get older, we lose that. And so I think that's an aspect of camp that really means a lot to me, and I look forward to every year, seeing those groups, those kids who bond throughout the week and are willing to admit they need help.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty cool thing for me every year. It's something along those lines that kind of touches you, or something that means a lot.
Yeah, I mean, and it probably piggybacks on that, but it's the fact that we've been going since we were 12 or 13 years old. We've been going to camp. Maywood's not the only camp we've ever been to. Nayati, Wiregrass, some others that we've been involved in. I think that the other piece of that is that the adults who go, it's impressive to see how it continues to touch the lives of adults. And I see every day, right now during the summer, I see adults posting stuff every day on Facebook about how their camp, whether it's Sardis Lake or Backwoods or, there's all these different camps that people go to, and how much it means to them still. And just that camaraderie. We've been texting some folks that are going to camp with us in a couple of weeks already, laughing. And it's like the bonds that you not only form when you were a kid, and the spiritual part, but also those bonds continue to happen, bleed over year after year, even into your 40s and 50s, and being able to see the connection and the closeness of these adults that go all of the time, and just the time that we get to spend together. So Absolutely. It's about the kids, and it's about the kids learning and growing, but there is a side effect.
There's fruit.
Yeah, there's fruit for the lives of the adults as well. So as we experience camp and get to go, we're working and we're tired, and there's no tired like camp tired and all that kind of stuff. But there's just something about being around, picking at and laughing with and sharing with and crying with sometimes the other adults that are there, and just knowing that we have a family that's bigger than just the one congregation that we work with every
Absolutely.
year.
Speaking of camp, I want to shout out to a guy whose grandfather certainly put the fear of the Lord in us on many occasions. Justin Brether has supported us through Patreon for a very long time, so we want to give him a shout out. A thank you. If you love the content of bringing mental health information to you from a Christian perspective, the way God intended it, think about joining that Patreon. You can do it as $5 a month. That helps us quite literally keep the lights on for the podcast. Helps us pay to keep it coming to you each week, along with the Friday Refresh and other silly podcasts that are maybe coming in the fall or in the future. But we would love for you to think about that, consider that. If nothing else, we would love for your prayers and to rate, review, subscribe to this episode. We've been number 2 on the good pods for a long time, and number 2 is great. But man, number one would be really awesome. But either way, we want you to know that we are rooting for you. If you're dealing with PTSD or any other mental health thing, we are certainly rooting for you here at the Helping Healing Humor with Ben and Travis podcast. And if there's anything else that we can cover, feel free to hit us up at our email, hello@benandtravis.com, or you can join our Facebook group and hit us up there. But we hope you have a great day.
Have a good one.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.